The rope bindings cut deep into Galena Kimball's wrists as the wagon lurched over another rocky outcrop, and she braced herself for the beating she knew would come when they finally stopped moving. She had seen what happened to Apache captives in the months since the cavalry raid that destroyed her village, watched strong warriors reduced to broken shells, witnessed proud women stripped of dignity and hope until they became hollow-eyed ghosts shuffling through each brutal day. The white men who had purchased her from the Army Scout 3 days ago spoke in rough voices that carried promises of violence, and she had spent every mile of this journey preparing herself to endure whatever cruelty awaited her at their destination. The September sun beat down mercilessly on the Utah Territory landscape in 1876, turning the red earth into a shimmering furnace that made the air dance and waver. Galena's throat burned with thirst, but she refused to make a sound that might be interpreted as weakness. At 19 years old, she had already survived more than most people faced in a lifetime. The massacre of her band near the Arizona border had taken her parents, her younger brother, and nearly everyone she had ever loved. The soldiers had rounded up the survivors like cattle, and she had spent 2 months in a temporary camp where disease and despair claimed more lives than bullets ever had. "We will make good money from this one of the men driving the wagon had said yesterday, speaking as though she could not understand English. But Galena had learned the language years ago from a missionary woman who had lived near their winter camp. She understood every word, every threat, every casual discussion of her fate as though she were livestock to be sold to the highest bidder. The wagon came to an abrupt halt, and rough hands grabbed her arms, hauling her over the side. She hit the ground hard, her bound hands preventing her from catching herself properly. Dust filled her mouth and nose as she struggled to her knees, expecting a boot to connect with her ribs at any moment. "Get her inside before anyone sees," the older man barked, his tobacco-stained beard barely moving as he spoke. "Boss wants her cleaned up and presentable by tomorrow." They were at some kind of ranch, Galena realized as they dragged her toward a weathered barn. Horses whinnied from a nearby corral, and she could see a modest house in the distance, smoke rising from its chimney. Mountains rose majestically to the east, their peaks still holding patches of snow even in early autumn. Under different circumstances, she might have found beauty in this landscape that was so different from her homeland. The barn door swung open with a protesting creak, and they shoved her inside. The sudden dimness after the bright sunlight left her momentarily blind, but she could smell hay and horses and leather. Her captors left her hands bound as they secured her to a support beam with additional rope, giving her just enough slack to sit or stand, but not enough to move more than a few feet in any direction. "Someone will bring you water eventually," the younger man said, not unkindly, though his words offered little comfort. "Do not try to escape. There is nowhere to go out here, and the boss does not appreciate losing his property." Then they were gone, and Galena was alone in the barn with only the soft sounds of horses shifting in their stalls for company. She closed her eyes and tried to center herself the way her grandmother had taught her, finding that place of calm strength deep within where fear could not reach. Whatever came next, she would face it with dignity. They could break her body, but her spirit remained her own. Hours passed. The light filtering through gaps in the barn walls shifted from harsh white to golden amber as the sun began its descent. Galena's tongue felt thick in her mouth, her lips cracked and bleeding from days without enough water. She had just begun to wonder if they intended to leave her here to die of thirst when the barn door opened again. A man entered carrying a bucket and what looked like a bundle of cloth under one arm. He was tall and lean, with dark hair that needed cutting and several days' worth of stubble shadowing his jaw. Unlike the men who had brought her here, he moved with a quiet confidence that suggested strength held carefully in check. His eyes, she noticed as he drew closer, were an unusual shade of gray-blue, like storm clouds gathering over distant hills. "I am Carson Dalton," he said, his voice surprisingly gentle as he knelt a few feet away from her. "I manage this ranch, and I was not consulted about bringing you here. That was my employer's decision, and one I intend to remedy as soon as possible." Galena stared at him, uncertain whether this was some new form of torment. Men had tried to gain her trust before with soft words, only to show their true nature once she let her guard down. Carson seemed to understand her suspicion. He set down the bucket and held up both hands, showing they were empty. "I am going to untie you now. I have water and food, and I will not hurt you. You have my word on that." "The word of a white man," Galena said in English, speaking for the first time since her capture. Her voice came out rough and harsh from disuse and thirst. "Worth less than the dust beneath my feet." Something flickered in Carson's eyes, an emotion she could not quite identify, respect, perhaps, or recognition of a hard truth. "Fair enough," he said quietly. "I cannot blame you for that assessment. But whether you believe my words or not, I am still going to untie you and offer you water. What you choose to do with that is your decision." He moved slowly and deliberately, giving her time to track his movements as he pulled a knife from his belt. Galena tensed, prepared for the blade to cut flesh instead of rope, but Carson simply sliced through her bindings with quick, efficient movements. The ropes fell away, and blood rushed painfully back into her hands and wrists. She gasped despite herself, flexing her fingers as sensation returned in waves of pins and needles. Carson reached for the bucket and pulled out a ladle, offering it to her. The water inside looked cool and clear, and Galena's body screamed at her to snatch it and drink until nothing remained. But pride and caution made her hesitate, even as her throat burned. "It is just water," Carson said. "Nothing added, nothing tainted. I drew it from the well myself not 10 minutes ago." Finally, Galena's thirst overcame her suspicion. She took the ladle with shaking hands and brought it to her lips. The water was cold and sweet, the most delicious thing she had ever tasted. She forced herself to drink slowly, knowing that gulping after days of deprivation would make her sick. When the ladle was empty, Carson silently refilled it, and she drank again. And again, until the worst of her thirst was satisfied. "Thank you," she said grudgingly, hating that she owed him even this small debt. Carson nodded and unwrapped the bundle he had brought, revealing a simple dress made of dark blue cotton, some bread, dried meat, and cheese. "The dress belonged to my sister before she got married and moved to California. It might be a bit large, but it is clean and whole. There is a corner behind that stall where you can change in privacy if you wish. No one will bother you. I will stand guard at the door." "Why?" Galena demanded, searching his face for signs of deception. "Why help me? What do you want?" Carson stood, his tall frame outlined against the fading light from the open door. "Because it is the right thing to do," he said simply. "And because I have seen enough cruelty in this world without adding to it. Eat, rest, and we will talk more later about getting you somewhere safe." He walked back toward the entrance and settled himself on a hay bale near the door, his back to her, giving her the privacy he had promised. Galena stared at him for a long moment, trying to understand this man who spoke kindly to an Apache captive, who offered help without demanding anything in return. Every instinct warned her not to trust, not to hope, because hope led to disappointment and disappointment led to pain. But her body's needs were more immediate than her mind's cautions. She took the food and dress and retreated to the corner Carson had indicated, using a horse stall for cover. The bread was fresh and soft, the meat well seasoned, the cheese sharp and creamy. She ate slowly, savoring each bite while keeping one eye on the man by the door. He did not move, did not turn around, true to his word about her privacy. The dress was indeed too large, hanging loose on her frame that had grown thin during captivity, but it was clean and smelled of lavender. Galena stripped off her torn, filthy clothes and pulled the dress over her head, feeling almost human again despite everything. She had just finished adjusting the garment when voices raised in anger echoed from outside the barn. "Where is she, Dalton? I paid good money for that Apache, and I will not have you interfering with my property." The voice was harsh and demanding, belonging to a man accustomed to getting his way. Galena moved closer to the barn wall, peering through a gap to see what was happening outside. Carson had stood and was facing a stocky man with silver hair and an expensive suit that looked out of place on a working ranch. Even from a distance, Galena could see the tension in Carson's shoulders, the careful control in his stance. "With respect, Mr. Harrison, buying and selling human beings is illegal," Carson said, his voice carrying clearly in the evening air. "What those men did, bringing her here, puts you and everyone on this ranch at risk. The territorial authorities would not look kindly on this situation." "The authorities look the way I tell them to look," Harrison spat. "I own half the government officials in this territory, and you would do well to remember that I own you too, Dalton. You work for me, and you will do as I say, or you will find yourself out on the street with nothing." "Then I guess I am out on the street," Carson replied calmly, "because I will not be party to this. That woman in the barn has done nothing to deserve being bought and sold like livestock. She is a person, not property, and I will not stand by while she is abused." Harrison's face turned an alarming shade of red. "You sanctimonious fool! Do you have any idea what you are throwing away? I made you foreman of this operation, gave you opportunities you would never have had otherwise, and you are willing to lose all of that over some Apache savage." "I am willing to lose everything before I lose my humanity," Carson said quietly. "And I would advise you to let her go, Mr. Harrison, before this situation becomes more complicated than it needs to be. You are threatening me." Harrison's voice rose to a near shout. "On my own land." "I am stating facts. That woman speaks English, which means she could testify about what happened here. The newspapers in Salt Lake City would have a field day with a story about a prominent rancher involved in illegal human trafficking. Is that really the kind of attention you want?" Inside the barn, Galena felt something shift in her chest, a strange warmth that had nothing to do with the dress or the food. This man, this stranger, was risking his livelihood to defend her. Not for any reward, not because he wanted something from her, but simply because he believed it was right. She had thought such men existed only in the stories her grandmother used to tell, mythical heroes who chose honor over personal gain. The argument outside continued, Harrison's voice growing increasingly threatening while Carson remained calm and unmoved. Finally, with a stream of curses that would have made a mule skinner blush, Harrison stormed off toward the main house. The two men who had originally brought Galena to the ranch materialized from somewhere, clearly having been listening to the confrontation. "Boss says we are to take the Apache girl and leave before morning," the older one announced. "Says he wants nothing more to do with this mess." "No," Carson said flatly. "You will leave, but the woman stays here until I can arrange safe passage for her to somewhere she actually wants to go." "You got no authority anymore, Dalton. Harrison just fired you. That means you do not give orders on this ranch. That may be true, but I still have this." Carson's hand moved to rest on the revolver holstered at his hip. He had not drawn it, had not even shifted his stance into anything overtly threatening, but the implication was clear. Now, I am sure you boys are reasonable men who would prefer to avoid any unpleasantness. I suggest you collect whatever wages Harrison owes you and head on down the road. The woman is under my protection now. The two men exchanged glances, clearly weighing their options. Finally, the younger one shrugged. Not getting paid enough to get shot over this, he muttered. Come on, let us get our money and find work somewhere less complicated. They departed with considerably less argument than Galena had expected, leaving Carson alone in the gathering darkness. He stood there for a long moment, his hand still resting on his gun, before finally relaxing and turning back toward the barn. Galena stepped out from her hiding spot as he entered, meeting his eyes directly. You just lost everything for me, she said, still struggling to comprehend what she had witnessed. Your job, your home, your security. Why? Carson removed his hat and ran a hand through his dark hair, looking suddenly weary. Because some things matter more than security, he said. My father always taught me that a man is only as good as his word and his deeds. If I had stood by and let them take you, knowing what they planned, I would not have been able to live with myself. It is as simple as that. Nothing is ever simple, Galena said, but there was less bitterness in her voice than before. Where will you go? What will you do? I have some money saved up and I have skills that are valuable anywhere cattle are raised. I will find work. He studied her face, his gray-blue eyes serious. But more importantly, where do you want to go? Do you have family, somewhere safe you can return to? The question hit Galena like a physical blow. Family. She had nothing left, no one to return to. Her band was scattered or dead, her homeland occupied by an army that saw her people as obstacles to be removed. I have nowhere, she admitted, the words tasting like ash in her mouth. Everyone I knew is gone. Carson's expression softened with sympathy that looked genuine rather than pitying. Then perhaps we can help each other, he said carefully. I need to leave this area and you need protection while you figure out your next steps. If you are willing, we could travel together. I give you my word that I will not harm you or force you to do anything against your will. You would be free to leave whenever you choose. It was a mad proposition, traveling with a white man she had known for barely an hour. Everything in Galena's experience screamed at her to refuse, to take her chances alone rather than trusting someone who might betray her the moment it became convenient. But another part of her, the part that had witnessed Carson throw away his entire life to defend her, whispered that perhaps this man was different. If I agree to this, she said slowly, I want your promise that you will never lie to me. I can accept many things, but not deception. You have my word, Carson replied without hesitation. Complete honesty between us, no matter what. Galena took a deep breath, feeling as though she stood at a crossroads where every path led into unknown territory. Then I will travel with you, at least for now, but I keep my freedom. I am not your servant or your property. I would not want you to be, Carson assured her. You are your own person, and I respect that. We leave as partners, nothing more and nothing less. They spent the rest of the evening making preparations for departure. Carson had a small cabin at the far edge of Harrison's property, where he had lived during his time as foreman, and he gathered his belongings while Galena waited in the barn. He returned with saddlebags filled with supplies, extra blankets, and a rifle that he handled with the easy familiarity of someone who knew weapons intimately. We will head north toward Salt Lake City, he explained as he checked his gear. I have contacts there who might know of work, and it is large enough that we can disappear into the population while we make plans. It is about 3 days' ride if we push hard. Harrison will not come after us?" Galena asked, still half expecting the silver-haired rancher to appear with hired guns and vengeance on his mind. "Unlikely. He is too concerned with his reputation to make a public fuss now that I called his bluff about the newspapers. Men like Harrison are only dangerous when they think they can act with impunity. Shine a light on their actions, and they scurry back into the shadows like the creatures they are." Carson saddled 2 horses, a rangy bay gelding for himself and a smaller paint mare for Galena. He adjusted the stirrups on the mare without being asked, showing an attention to detail that spoke of genuine consideration. As Galena mounted, she tried to remember the last time someone had shown her such simple courtesy and came up blank. They rode out under a sky blazing with stars, the kind of vast celestial display that only existed far from city lights. The autumn night was cool but not cold, and Galena breathed in the sage-scented air, feeling the first tendrils of something that might eventually become hope. She was still a captive in many ways, trapped by circumstances and history and the violence that had destroyed her old life. But for the first time in months, she felt like a person rather than a piece of property, and that shift was more profound than any physical freedom. Carson set a steady pace, pushing neither too hard nor too easy, clearly experienced at long-distance travel. They rode in silence for the first hour, each lost in their own thoughts. Finally, as they topped a rise that gave a view of the moonlit landscape stretching endlessly before them, Galena spoke. "Tell me about your family," she said. "You mentioned a sister." Carson glanced over at her, seeming surprised by the personal question. "My sister Rebecca is 2 years younger than me. She married a shopkeeper and seems happy in Sacramento. My parents died when I was 16. Cholera epidemics swept through our town in Kansas, took about 1/3 of the population. That is when I headed west, looking for a fresh start." "How old are you now?" 25. Old enough to have learned some hard lessons, young enough to still believe things can get better. He offered a slight smile. "What about you? Do you want to talk about your family?" Galena hesitated, the wound still too fresh and painful. But Carson had been honest with her, and she felt she owed him the same courtesy. "My mother was a healer, skilled with plants and medicines. My father was a respected warrior who believed we could find peace with the white settlers if we showed wisdom and patience. He was wrong. They killed him anyway, along with my mother and little brother. I was away gathering wood when the soldiers came, which is the only reason I survived." "I am sorry," Carson said quietly, and the simplicity of those words somehow meant more than elaborate expressions of sympathy would have. "No one should have to endure what you have endured." "Many of my people have endured far worse," Galena replied. "I am not special in my suffering." "Perhaps not, but that does not make your pain any less real or valid." They rode on through the night, stopping only once to rest the horses and share some of the food Carson had brought. He proved to be a man of few words but genuine presence, someone who did not feel the need to fill every silence with empty chatter. Galena found his quiet company soothing in a way she had not expected. Dawn found them in a shallow canyon where a creek provided water for the horses and cover from casual observation. Carson insisted on taking the first watch while Galena slept, and though she protested that she could stand her own watch, exhaustion claimed her the moment she lay down on the blanket he had spread for her. She woke to the smell of coffee and bacon frying over a small fire. The sun was well up, suggesting she had slept for several hours. Carson sat nearby, tending the fire and looking considerably more rough than he had the previous evening, with dark circles under his eyes that spoke of sleepless vigilance. "You should have woken me," Galena said as she sat up, feeling guilty that he had stood watch the entire time. "You needed the rest more than I did," Carson replied, handing her a tin cup of coffee. "Besides, I am used to long nights. You will take the next watch and we will be even." The coffee was strong and hot, exactly what Galena needed. She accepted a plate of bacon and hardtack, marveling at how strange it felt to sit companionably with a white man, sharing a meal as though they were friends rather than bitter enemies. Everything in her upbringing said this should not be possible, that the gulf between their peoples was too wide and too deep to bridge. Yet here they were, two lost souls helping each other survive in a harsh world. "Carson," she said, testing the weight of his name on her tongue. "What is a Dalton?" He looked puzzled for a moment, then understood. "Dalton is my family name, not a word with a separate meaning. What about Kimball? Is that an Apache name?" "No," Galena admitted. "The missionary woman who taught me English could not pronounce my Apache name properly. She called me Galena because she said I had the strength of lead ore, and Kimball was her own family name. She gave it to me like a gift. I kept it after she died because it reminded me that not all white people are cruel." "What is your Apache name?" "I would like to know it, if you are willing to share." Galena hesitated, then spoke the words in her native tongue, the syllables flowing with a musical quality that English could never match. Carson tried to repeat it, mangling the pronunciation badly enough that Galena actually smiled despite herself. "Perhaps Galena is easier for both of us," she said, and was rewarded with an answering grin from Carson that transformed his serious face into something warmer and more open. They spent the heat of the day resting in the canyon's shade, then rode again as evening approached. This pattern continued for the next 2 days, and with each mile, Galena felt herself relaxing incrementally. Carson never gave her reason to doubt his word. He maintained a respectful distance, never pressed her with inappropriate questions or unwanted attention, and treated her with a courtesy that would have seemed impossible during her captivity. On the 3rd evening, they crested a hill and saw Salt Lake City spread out in the valley below, its buildings glowing golden in the sunset. The city was larger than Galena had imagined, with wide streets laid out in an orderly grid and substantial structures that spoke of prosperity and permanence. Mountains rose dramatically on all sides, making the valley feel both protected and slightly isolated from the rest of the world. "We will find an inn or boarding house where you can get a proper room and a real bed," Carson said as they descended toward the city. "Then I will start asking around about work opportunities." "What kind of work are you qualified for?" Galena asked, realizing she knew surprisingly little about Carson's actual skills beyond his ability to manage a ranch. "I can do most things involving horses and cattle. I am decent with carpentry and basic mechanical repairs. I am a fair hand with accounts and record keeping, and I am literate and numerate enough to handle business correspondence." He paused, then added with a touch of dry humor, "I am also an excellent shot and can hold my own in a fight, though I prefer to avoid violence when possible." They entered the city as full darkness fell, and Galena tried not to stare at the gaslights that illuminated the main streets, at the variety of people moving about even at this late hour. Salt Lake City in 1876 was a thriving community, and she could see evidence of the Mormon influence that had shaped its development in the well-planned streets and sober architecture. Carson found a modest boarding house run by a stern-looking woman named Mrs. Patterson, who eyed Galena with obvious suspicion. "We do not usually accommodate Indians," she said bluntly. "Then it is fortunate that Miss Kimball is my traveling companion and under my protection," Carson replied, his voice taking on a steel edge that Galena had not heard before. "We require 2 rooms for at least a week, and I can pay in advance. If that is unacceptable, we will take our business elsewhere, though I imagine the other boarding houses in town will be happy to accommodate paying customers without prejudice. Mrs. Patterson's eyes narrowed, clearly torn between her prejudices and her desire for income. Finally, commerce won out over bigotry. 2 rooms, payment in advance, and I will have no trouble from either of you. The Indian woman is not to wander the house unsupervised. Miss Kimball will go where she pleases when she pleases, Carson said flatly. But I assure you she will cause no trouble. Unlike some people, she knows how to behave with basic human decency. The barb was not lost on Mrs. Patterson, whose face flushed with indignation. But she took Carson's money and showed them to adjacent rooms on the 2nd floor, small but clean spaces with real beds and washstands. After Mrs. Patterson left with a final disapproving sniff, Galena turned to Carson. "You did not have to antagonize her on my behalf," she said. "I am accustomed to such treatment." "Being accustomed to it does not make it right," Carson replied. "And I meant what I said about you being under my protection. Anyone who wants to mistreat you will have to go through me first, and I do not intend to make that easy." The fierce conviction in his voice sent an unexpected warmth through Galena's chest. She had been protecting herself for so long, relying only on her own strength and determination to survive. Having someone else stand as her shield felt simultaneously comforting and terrifying. Trust was a fragile thing, too easily shattered. Yet she found herself wanting to trust this quiet cowboy who asked nothing from her but honest companionship. Over the following days, they fell into a routine. Carson spent his mornings seeking employment opportunities, returning each afternoon to share meals with Galena and tell her about his progress. She, in turn, explored the city cautiously, learning its rhythms and patterns while carefully avoiding situations that might lead to confrontation. The citizens of Salt Lake City seemed divided in their reactions to her presence. Some ignored her completely. Some watched with open hostility, and a few offered cautious nods of acknowledgement that might have been respect or might have been mere tolerance. On the 5th day, Carson returned to the boarding house with news and excitement clear on his face. "I have a job," he announced as soon as Galena opened her door. "A rancher named Samuel Crawford needs someone to manage his horse breeding operation about 15 miles south of here. It is good work with fair pay, and he does not seem to care about my recent departure from Harrison's ranch." "That is wonderful," Galena said, and meant it sincerely. She was happy for Carson's good fortune, even as she wondered what it meant for her own uncertain future. "When do you start?" "End of the week." "But Galena, I asked Crawford about you, explained that I had a companion who needed safe accommodation and perhaps work. He said you would be welcome at the ranch if you want to come. His wife could use help with domestic tasks, and they have a small cabin that is currently empty. It would not be charity, you would earn your keep with honest work, but you would be safe and have a place to stay while you figure out your next steps." The offer was generous, more than Galena had any right to expect. Yet she found herself hesitating, torn between gratitude and the fear of becoming dependent on Carson's kindness. "I cannot keep relying on you to solve my problems," she said quietly. "You have done so much already. I should find my own way." Carson stepped closer, his expression serious. "You are not relying on me. We are helping each other, remember? Partners. And honestly, I would rest easier knowing you were somewhere safe rather than trying to survive alone in a world that has not shown much kindness to your people. But the choice is yours, Galena. It has always been yours." She searched his face, looking for any sign of hidden motives or unstated expectations. But all she saw was genuine concern and respect. Over the past week, She had come to know Carson well enough to recognize his honesty. He said what he meant and followed through on his promises. In a world of broken treaties and empty words, such constancy was rarer than gold. "I will come with you," she decided. "At least for a while to see how things work out, but Carson, I need you to understand something. I am Apache. That is not a fact that will change or disappear just because I wear American clothes and speak English. If your presence in my life brings you trouble, I will leave rather than damage your prospects." "Let me worry about my own prospects," Carson said gently. "And for what it is worth, I would not want you to be anything other than who you are. Your heritage is part of what makes you strong, and anyone who cannot see that is a fool." The remaining days in Salt Lake City passed quickly. Carson purchased supplies for their move to the Crawford Ranch, while Galena wrestled with the strange feelings growing in her chest whenever she saw him. It was not love, not yet, but perhaps the beginning of something that could become love if she allowed it. He was unlike any man she had ever known, patient where others had been demanding, gentle where others had been rough, respectful where others had been entitled. They departed Salt Lake City on a crisp autumn morning with the first hints of winter showing in the mountain peaks. The ride to Crawford's ranch was shorter and more leisurely than their desperate flight from Harrison's property, allowing them to actually enjoy the spectacular Utah landscape. Carson pointed out various landmarks and shared stories about the region's history, and Galena found herself responding with stories from her own past, carefully selected memories that did not hurt too much to speak aloud. The Crawford Ranch came into view by early afternoon, a sprawling operation with multiple barns, extensive corrals, and a large main house built in the practical style of successful frontier farmers. Samuel Crawford himself came out to meet them, a weathered man in his 50s with kind eyes and a firm handshake. "You must be Carson and Miss Kimball," he said warmly. "Welcome to Tall Pine Ranch. My wife Elizabeth is up at the house preparing lunch. Come on up and get settled in." Elizabeth Crawford was a small woman with graying hair and a smile that seemed to encompass everyone around her. She welcomed Galena without hesitation or prejudice, offering her hand in greeting as though they were equals meeting for the first time. "I am so pleased to have another woman around," she said sincerely. "It gets lonely out here with just Samuel and the ranch hands for company. I hope we can become friends, Miss Kimball. Please call me Galena," she replied, startled by the warmth of her reception. The cabin Carson had mentioned was small but well built, with a wood stove, a decent bed, and even some basic furniture. It was situated about 100 yards from the main house, offering privacy while still being close enough for safety and convenience. Elizabeth had already stocked it with fresh linens, firewood, and basic supplies. "This is too much," Galena protested as she looked around the cabin. "You do not even know me. Carson vouches for you, and that is good enough for us," Samuel said simply. "Besides, Elizabeth is right about it being lonely out here. Having you around will be good for everyone. Now come on back to the house for lunch, and we will discuss work arrangements and expectations." The next weeks passed in a blur of activity and adjustment. Carson threw himself into his new responsibilities, managing the ranch's extensive horse breeding program with skill and dedication. Galena worked alongside Elizabeth, learning new skills in cooking, preserving food, and managing a frontier household while also contributing her own knowledge of medicinal plants and traditional remedies. The relationship between Galena and Carson shifted subtly during this time. They saw each other daily, shared meals, and often sat together in the evenings talking about everything and nothing. Galena learned about Carson's dreams of eventually owning his own small ranch, about his love of horses and open spaces, about his complicated feelings toward a country that promised equality while practicing exclusion. Carson, in turn, learned about Apache traditions, about Galena's memories of a childhood spent moving with the seasons, about her mother's wisdom and her father's courage. One evening in late October, as they sat watching the sunset paint the mountains in shades of purple and gold, Carson reached over and gently took Galena's hand. She started at the contact, not pulling away but clearly surprised. "I am sorry," he said quickly. "I should have asked first. Galena, these past weeks have been the best of my life, and that is largely because of you. I treasure your friendship, and I wanted you to know that." Galena looked down at their joined hands, his rough and calloused from years of hard work, hers similarly marked by labor and hardship. There was something profound about that simple contact, two damaged souls reaching across the chasms of culture and history to find connection. "I treasure your friendship too," she admitted quietly. "More than I expected to, more than I thought possible. You have given me back something I thought was lost forever." "What is that?" "Hope. The belief that tomorrow might be better than today. You showed me that kindness still exists in a world that seemed determined to prove otherwise." Carson's thumb brushed gently across her knuckles. "You showed me something too. You showed me that strength is not about dominating others or refusing to feel. Real strength is surviving the unsurvivable and still finding reasons to keep going. You are the strongest person I have ever met, Galena Kimball." She turned to face him fully, studying the angles of his face in the fading light. He had become dear to her, she realized with a jolt of recognition. Somewhere between their flight from Harrison's ranch and these peaceful weeks at Tall Pine, Carson had transformed from stranger to friend to something more complicated and precious. The thought terrified her. Love made you vulnerable, gave others the power to hurt you in ways that physical violence never could. As though sensing her fear, Carson squeezed her hand gently. "I will never ask more from you than you are willing to give," he said softly. "But I want you to know that I care about you, Galena. Deeply. Whatever happens next, whatever choices you make about your future, that will not change. I care about you too," Galena whispered, the admission feeling like jumping off a cliff without knowing if she would fly or fall. "I did not want to." It seemed safer not to feel anything, not to let anyone close enough to matter. "But you matter, Carson. You have mattered since the moment you chose to defend a stranger at the cost of everything you had built." They sat in comfortable silence as darkness fell, hands still joined, both contemplating the strange and precious thing growing between them. It was too soon to call it love, perhaps, but it was definitely the foundation on which love could be built: respect, trust, genuine affection, and the willingness to stand together against whatever challenges the world might throw at them. Winter arrived with the first significant snowfall in mid-November. The mountains transformed into a pristine wonderland of white peaks and frosted valleys, stunningly beautiful but also harsh and unforgiving. The ranch settled into its cold weather routine, with most of the hands departing for winter employment elsewhere, leaving only a skeleton crew to maintain the property and care for the breeding stock. Elizabeth taught Galena to knit during the long evenings, and they spent hours by the fire creating warm garments while Samuel and Carson discussed horses and business plans. It felt remarkably domestic and peaceful, a family unit forged not by blood but by mutual respect and genuine affection. Galena caught herself thinking of this place as home, and the realization was both comforting and unsettling. Christmas approached, and Elizabeth insisted on celebrating with everyone on the ranch. "I know it may not be your tradition," she said to Galena as they prepared food for the holiday feast, "but we would love to have you join us. You are part of this household now, part of our family." The word family hit Galena with unexpected force. She had believed that part of her life was over, that she would spend the rest of her days alone, untethered to any community or people. Yet here was this kind woman offering exactly what Galena had thought lost forever belonging. "I would be honored to celebrate with you," Galena said, her voice thick with emotion she tried to hide. "Thank you, Elizabeth, for everything. You have shown me more kindness than I had any right to expect." Elizabeth set down the bowl she was holding and pulled Galena into a firm hug. "You have every right to expect kindness, dear girl. Every right to expect love and respect and all the good things life has to offer. Do not ever let anyone convince you otherwise." On Christmas Eve, they gathered in the main house for dinner, and afterward, Samuel surprised everyone by producing gifts. For Elizabeth, a beautiful shawl he had commissioned from a weaver in Salt Lake City. For Carson, a quality leather saddle that made the younger man's eyes widen with appreciation. And for Galena, a small wooden box containing a silver necklace with a pendant shaped like a horse. "Elizabeth and I wanted you to have something to remember your first Christmas at Tall Pine," Samuel explained as Galena stared at the gift in wonder. "Carson told us you liked horses, so we thought this might be appropriate." Tears pricked at Galena's eyes, and she blinked them back fiercely. She was Apache. Her people did not cry over gifts, yet the simple gesture of inclusion, the acknowledgement that she belonged here, shattered her carefully maintained composure. "Thank you," she managed. "I will treasure this always." Carson helped her fasten the necklace, his fingers gentle against the nape of her neck. Their eyes met as he stepped back to admire how it looked, and something passed between them, an understanding that did not require words. They were building something here, something rare and valuable and worth protecting. Later that night, after Elizabeth and Samuel had retired to their room, Carson walked Galena back to her cabin through the snow. The world was silent except for the crunch of their boots and the soft whisper of wind through the trees. At her door, Carson paused. "I have something for you too," he said, pulling a small package from his coat. "It is not much, but I thought you might like it." Galena unwrapped the package to find a book, its leather cover worn but well maintained. "Leaves of Grass" by Walt Whitman, she read aloud. "I have never heard of this." "It is poetry," Carson explained. "Beautiful, powerful stuff about America and freedom and the essential dignity of all people. Some of the themes remind me of you: the strength to stand alone, the courage to be yourself despite pressure to conform. I thought you might enjoy it." Galena clutched the book to her chest, overwhelmed by the thoughtfulness of the gift. Carson had chosen something personal and meaningful, something that showed he truly understood her. "I love it," she said simply. "Thank you, Carson, for this, for everything." "Galena," he said softly, "I need to tell you something, and I have been trying to find the right words for weeks now. The truth is, I am falling in love with you. I know the timing might not be ideal, and I know we come from different worlds, but I cannot help how I feel. You have become the most important person in my life, and I needed you to know that." Her breath caught in her throat. Part of her wanted to retreat, to protect herself from the vulnerability that love demanded. But a larger part, the part that Carson had helped heal and strengthen, wanted to step forward into this new possibility with courage rather than fear. "I am falling in love with you too," she admitted, the words coming out in a rush. "It terrifies me. Loving someone gives them the power to destroy you, and I have been destroyed enough already. But when I am with you, I feel safe in a way I never have before. You make me believe that maybe, just maybe, I deserve happiness." Carson cupped her face gently in his hands, his thumbs brushing away tears she had not realized she was shedding. "You deserve all the happiness in the world," he said fiercely. And I swear to you, Galena, I will spend the rest of my life trying to give it to you if you will let me." "Yes," she whispered. "Yes, I will let you. I want to try this, Carson. I want to build something with you, something real and lasting and good." He kissed her then, soft and gentle and full of promise. It was Galena's first kiss, and it felt like coming home after a long journey through hostile territory. When they finally pulled apart, both were smiling through tears, hearts full of the hope that had seemed impossible just months before. Winter gave way to spring with all the explosive beauty that came to the Utah highlands. Wildflowers carpeted the meadows, and new foals arrived in the breeding barns, keeping everyone busy from dawn until dusk. Carson and Galena's relationship deepened with each passing day, evolving from tentative hope into solid certainty. They fit together in ways that transcended their different backgrounds, finding common ground in shared values and complementary strengths. In May, Carson approached Samuel Crawford with a question. "Sir, I want to ask for Galena's hand in marriage, but out of respect, I wanted to speak with you first, since you have been both employer and friend to me." Samuel smiled and clapped Carson on the shoulder. "Son, you do not need my permission, but you certainly have my blessing. That girl has been good for you, and you have been good for her. Elizabeth and I would be honored to stand up with you both at the wedding if you would like." "I would like that very much," Carson said, relief and joy evident in his voice. "Thank you, Samuel, for everything. You and Elizabeth gave us a chance when we had nowhere else to go. You earned that chance through hard work and good character. Now go ask that woman to marry you properly, and let Elizabeth know so she can start planning. You know how she loves a wedding." That evening, Carson took Galena riding to a high meadow overlooking the valley, where the sunset painted everything in shades of gold and rose. They dismounted and stood together at the edge of a cliff, taking in the breathtaking view. "Galena," Carson began, taking both her hands in his, "when I first met you, I saw someone who had survived the unsurvivable, someone strong enough to stand alone against the world. Over these past months, I have had the privilege of seeing beyond that strength to the incredible woman underneath. You are brave and wise and kind, even after everything you have endured. You make me want to be better, to build something worthwhile, to create a future that honors both where we have been and where we are going." He reached into his pocket and pulled out a simple gold band that had belonged to his mother. "I know I cannot erase the past or guarantee the future. I cannot promise that life will be easy or that we will not face hardship. But I can promise that I will stand beside you through whatever comes. I will defend you, cherish you, and love you with everything I have. Will you marry me, Galena? Will you take this crazy journey with me and see where it leads?" Galena looked at the ring, at Carson's earnest face, at the vast landscape spreading below them full of possibility and promise. 6 months ago, she had been a captive expecting cruelty, stripped of hope and dignity. Now she stood here, free and loved, with a future she could barely have imagined in her darkest hours. It was not the life she had been born to, not the path she had expected to walk. But it was good, and it was real, and it was hers to choose. "Yes," she said clearly, her voice carrying across the meadow. "Yes, Carson Dalton, I will marry you. I will build this life with you and face whatever comes next together." He slid the ring onto her finger, and it fit perfectly, as though his mother had known across the years that this moment would come. They kissed as the sun sank below the horizon, two souls who had found each other against impossible odds, bound now by love that transcended the boundaries of culture and history. The wedding took place in early June at a small church in Salt Lake City. Samuel and Elizabeth stood as witnesses, along with Carson's sister Rebecca, who traveled from California for the occasion. The ceremony was simple but heartfelt, with a minister who did not flinch at marrying a white cowboy to an Apache woman. He spoke of love conquering divisions and creating bridges where walls had stood before. Galena wore a white dress that Elizabeth had sewn, with traditional Apache beadwork incorporated into the design as a nod to her heritage. Carson wore his best suit and could not stop smiling throughout the ceremony. When they exchanged vows, promising to honor and cherish each other for all their days, there was not a dry eye in the small church. The reception, at a nearby restaurant, was attended by a handful of friends from the ranch and some of the more open-minded residents of Salt Lake City who had come to know and respect the unusual couple. Even Mrs. Patterson from the boarding house appeared, grudgingly offering her congratulations and admitting that perhaps she had judged Galena too harshly at first. As the evening wound down and guests began to depart, Rebecca pulled her brother aside. "I am so happy for you, Carson. She is wonderful, and it is clear she loves you deeply. Mother and father would have been proud of the man you have become." "Thank you, Becca. That means more than you know." Carson and Galena spent their wedding night at the finest hotel in Salt Lake City, a luxury they could barely afford, but that felt appropriate for marking such an important occasion. As they lay together afterward, wrapped in each other's arms, Galena traced the line of Carson's jaw with gentle fingers. "I never thought I could be this happy," she murmured. "After everything that happened, I believed joy was something that existed only in memory, not in the present or future. But you proved me wrong, Carson. You showed me that happiness is possible even after tragedy, that love can grow in the most unlikely places." "We proved each other wrong," Carson replied, kissing her forehead. "I used to think I was destined to drift through life alone, never quite belonging anywhere or to anyone. But you gave me roots, Galena. You gave me a reason to build rather than just survive. Whatever challenges we face from here on out, I know we can handle them together." They returned to Tall Pine Ranch as husband and wife, settling into the rhythm of married life with the ease that came from already knowing each other so well. Samuel offered to help Carson establish his own small horse breeding operation on a corner of the ranch property, with an eye toward eventual independence. It was a generous offer that would allow Carson to build equity while still benefiting from the resources and reputation of Tall Pine. Summer passed in a haze of hard work and deep contentment. Carson proved himself invaluable to the ranch's operation, and his own breeding program began to show promise. Galena continued working alongside Elizabeth, while also helping with the horses, her natural affinity for the animals becoming increasingly apparent. She was particularly skilled with the difficult or traumatized horses, approaching them with a patience and understanding born from her own experiences with suffering. In August, Galena realized she was pregnant. The discovery filled her with a complex mixture of joy and terror. She wanted this child desperately, wanted to build the family she had lost, but she also could not forget the dangers that childbirth posed on the frontier. Her mother had lost 2 babies between Galena and her younger brother, and many women did not survive the birthing process. When she told Carson, he immediately pulled her into his arms, holding her tight as though he could physically shield her from all possible harm. "We will get through this together," he promised. "Elizabeth can help, and we will bring in a doctor from Salt Lake City when the time comes." "You are strong, Galena. The strongest person I know. Our child will be lucky to have you as a mother." The pregnancy progressed well through the fall and into winter. Elizabeth fussed over Galena constantly, making sure she rested enough and ate properly and did not overexert herself. Carson became almost comically protective, hovering anxiously whenever Galena so much as picked up something heavier than a cup of tea. It was endearing and occasionally frustrating, but Galena could not truly be annoyed at his concern. She knew it came from love and the very real fear of losing her. As winter deepened and her pregnancy advanced, Galena spent long hours thinking about the child she would soon bring into the world. This baby would be born into a complex legacy, carrying both Apache and white heritage in a society that did not always know what to do with such mixing. She and Carson had many long conversations about how to raise their child with pride in both cultures, how to teach strength without bitterness, how to acknowledge the hard truths of history while still finding hope for the future. "Our child will know their Apache heritage," Galena said firmly one evening as they sat by the fire in their cabin. "I want them to learn the language, understand the traditions, know the stories of my people. But I also want them to move freely in your world, to have the opportunities and education that were denied to me." "They will have all of that," Carson assured her. "We will make sure of it, and if anyone gives them trouble about their mixed heritage, they will have to answer to both of us." The baby arrived in late March of 1877, during a late spring snowstorm that made it impossible to bring a doctor from Salt Lake City. Elizabeth and a midwife from a neighboring ranch attended the birth, while Carson paced anxiously outside the cabin, his usual calm completely shattered by worry for his wife. The labor was long and difficult, testing Galena's strength to its limits. But finally, as dawn broke over the snow-covered mountains, a baby's cry split the air. Elizabeth emerged from the cabin with tears streaming down her face. "You have a son," she told Carson, "and Galena is well. Exhausted but well. Go on in and meet your boy." Carson entered the cabin to find Galena propped up in bed, looking pale and drained but radiantly happy. In her arms was a tiny bundle wrapped in a soft blanket. He approached slowly, almost reverently, and looked down at his son's face for the first time. The baby had Galena's dark hair and delicate features, but Carson could see hints of his own family in the shape of the chin and the set of the ears. "He is perfect," Carson breathed, touching one tiny hand with a gentle finger. "Absolutely perfect. How are you feeling? Tired? Sore?" "Happier than I have ever been." Galena smiled up at him, her eyes shining with unshed tears. "We made this, Carson, this beautiful new life. Despite everything, despite all the pain and loss and hardship, we created something pure and good. What should we name him?" Carson asked, settling carefully on the edge of the bed. They had discussed names for months, debating various options from both their cultures. Finally, Galena said, "I want to name him James after your father, James Carson Dalton. But we will also give him an Apache name to use within our family, so he knows both sides of himself." "James Carson Dalton," Carson repeated, testing how it sounded. "I think my father would have been proud to have a grandson carry his name. What Apache name were you thinking?" Galena spoke a word in her native language, then translated. "It means bridge between worlds, because that is what he is and what we hope he can be. Someone who carries the best of both peoples and shows that understanding is possible." Their son thrived, a healthy baby who grew steadily through the spring and summer. He had Galena's dark eyes and Carson's ready smile, and he was adored by everyone on the ranch. Samuel and Elizabeth doted on him as though he were their own grandchild, and even the ranch hands who had initially been skeptical about Carson marrying an Apache woman found themselves won over by the happy little boy. As James approached his first birthday, Carson received news that changed their situation significantly. Samuel Crawford's health had been declining for several months, and he called Carson and Galena to the main house one evening for a serious conversation. "The doctors in Salt Lake City tell me my heart is giving out," Samuel said bluntly, Elizabeth sitting beside him with tears in her eyes. "I have maybe a year left, possibly less. Elizabeth and I have been discussing what to do about the ranch, and we have a proposition for you both." He explained that they had no children of their own, and that his distant relatives back east had no interest in running a frontier horse ranch. "We would like to deed Tall Pine over to you, Carson and Galena. Not immediately, but when I pass on. In the meantime, we will make you full partners in the operation. You have earned it through hard work and loyalty, and we cannot think of better people to carry on what we have built here." Carson and Galena were stunned into silence. It was an overwhelmingly generous offer, one that would secure their future and their son's future in ways they had hardly dared dream about. "We do not know what to say," Carson finally managed. "This is far more than we deserve." "Nonsense," Samuel said firmly. "You have made this place better with your presence. And more importantly, you gave Elizabeth and me something we thought we would never have: a family. Young James calls me Grandpa, and I will tell you that is worth more than all the land and horses in Utah. So yes, you deserve this, and we will not hear any argument about it." They accepted with profound gratitude, and over the following months Carson took on increasing responsibilities as Samuel's health continued to decline. Samuel passed away peacefully in his sleep in early 1878, leaving behind a legacy of kindness and a ranch that would continue under new management. Elizabeth remained in the main house, which had always been the plan. She became a constant presence in James's life, the grandmother he would otherwise have lacked. The arrangement worked beautifully, with Carson and Galena managing the business aspects of the ranch, while Elizabeth helped with childcare and household management. The years that followed were not without challenges. There were droughts and harsh winters, market fluctuations that affected cattle prices, and occasional confrontations with people who could not accept a mixed-race couple running a successful ranch. But Carson and Galena faced each obstacle together, their partnership growing stronger with every test they weathered. They had 2 more children, a daughter they named Emma in 1879 and another son, Samuel, named for their benefactor, in 1882. The children grew up bilingual, learning both English and Apache, absorbing stories and traditions from both cultures. Galena made sure they understood the struggles their people had endured, while Carson taught them the skills they would need to thrive in American society. Tall Pine Ranch became known throughout the territory as a place where quality horses were bred and where fair dealing was guaranteed. Carson's reputation for honest business practices and skilled animal husbandry spread, bringing customers from as far away as California and Colorado. Galena became equally respected for her knowledge of horse medicine and her ability to gentle even the most difficult animals. As their children grew, James showed an early aptitude for working with horses, spending every free moment in the barns with his father. Emma inherited her mother's gift for healing, showing interest in both traditional Apache remedies and modern medical practices. Young Samuel was still too little to show his particular talents, but he was a cheerful, affectionate child who seemed determined to make everyone around him smile. The passage of time brought changes beyond the ranch as well. The frontier was slowly becoming less wild, with more settlements, better roads, and increasing connectivity to the rest of the nation. The conflicts between Apache bands and the U.S. Army continued in other parts of the West, each news report causing Galena pain as she thought of her people still fighting a losing battle for their homeland and way of life. One evening in 1883, as they sat on the porch watching their children play in the yard, Galena leaned her head against Carson's shoulder. "Do you ever wonder how different our lives would be if we had never met?" she asked. Carson wrapped an arm around her, pulling her closer. "I try not to think about it, honestly. That version of reality is too bleak to contemplate. Without you, I would probably still be drifting from ranch to ranch, doing competent work but never really investing in anything or anyone. You gave me purpose, Galena. You gave me everything that matters." "You gave me back my life," Galena replied softly. "When those men captured me, I was certain I would die badly. At best, I thought I might survive as a broken shadow of who I had been. I never imagined that I would find love, build a family, create a home. You showed me kindness when I expected only cruelty, and that changed everything." They sat in comfortable silence, watching as James helped Emma build something with sticks while little Samuel toddled around offering unhelpful assistance. The sun was setting behind the mountains, painting the sky in brilliant shades of orange and purple. It was a scene of such ordinary domestic beauty that it made Galena's heart ache with gratitude. "We should tell the children our story someday," Carson said thoughtfully. "Not the sanitized version, but the truth about how we met and what we overcame to be together. They should understand that love is not always easy or simple, but it is always worth fighting for." "When they are older," Galena agreed, "when they can understand the complexity of it all. For now, let them just be children, safe and loved and free from the weight of our history." As the years continued to pass, the Dalton family became an established and respected part of the community around Salt Lake City. There were always a few who looked askance at the mixed-race family, who whispered behind their hands about Carson's Apache wife and half-breed children. But these voices grew quieter over time, overwhelmed by the evidence of the Dalton success, their contributions to the local economy, and their children's undeniable charm and intelligence. James, as he grew into his teenage years, became a skilled horseman and shrewd judge of livestock. At 16, he was already handling complex negotiations with buyers and breeders, showing a business acumen that made his father proud. Emma, at 14, was apprenticing with a doctor in Salt Lake City, her natural healing abilities combined with formal medical training making her a formidable young woman. Samuel, at 11, was still finding his path, but his gift for mathematics suggested he might be the one to handle the increasingly complex financial aspects of running a large ranch. Elizabeth lived to see all three children reach adulthood, passing away peacefully in 1890 at the age of 72. Her death hit the entire family hard, but particularly Galena, who had lost a mentor, a friend, and the closest thing to a mother she had known since her own mother's death. They buried Elizabeth next to Samuel on a hillside overlooking the ranch, and Galena made sure fresh flowers adorned the graves throughout every season. Carson and Galena grew older together, their hair silvering, their faces lined with years of laughter and hard work. But the love between them never diminished. If anything, it deepened with time, enriched by shared experiences and the family they had built together. They had created something remarkable, not just a successful ranch, but a legacy of overcoming hatred with love, of building bridges across seemingly insurmountable divides. On their 20th wedding anniversary in 1897, their children organized a celebration that brought together friends and neighbors from across the territory. James was now a married man himself, his wife Sarah pregnant with what would be Carson and Galena's first grandchild. Emma was engaged to the young doctor she had apprenticed with, planning a wedding for the following spring. Samuel was in his final year of studies at a business college in San Francisco, already making plans to return and modernize the ranch's operations. As Carson and Galena stood together, surrounded by family and friends, they reflected on the impossible journey that had brought them to this moment. From that barn where a captive Apache woman had expected cruelty and instead found kindness, to this joyous celebration of 2 decades of marriage and partnership, it was a story that defied the prejudices of their era and proved that love could transcend the deepest divisions. "Thank you," Galena said to Carson as they danced together, her head resting against his chest as it had so many times over the years. "For seeing me as a person when others saw only a category, for standing up for what was right when it cost you everything, for building this life with me." "Thank you for trusting me when you had every reason not to," Carson replied, his arms tightening around her. "For taking a chance on a cowboy who was just trying to do the decent thing. For showing me what real strength looks like. For making every day of these 20 years better than I had any right to expect." Their first grandchild, a boy they named William, arrived in late 1897, and Carson and Galena discovered the unique joy of grandparenthood. Watching James with his son, seeing the care and attention he lavished on the baby, made them realize how fully the values they had tried to instill had taken root. James was determined that his son would grow up knowing both sides of his heritage, continuing the tradition Galena and Carson had started. Emma's wedding in 1898 was a grand affair that brought even more family together. Carson walked his daughter down the aisle with tears in his eyes, while Galena watched from the front row, remembering her own simple wedding and marveling at how far they had all come. Emma's new husband, Dr. Thomas Wheeler, was a good man who respected his wife's mixed heritage and saw it as an asset rather than a liability. Samuel returned from San Francisco with new ideas about scientific breeding programs and modern business practices. He worked alongside his father to implement innovations that kept Tall Pine Ranch competitive in an increasingly industrialized world. The ranch continued to thrive and expand, becoming one of the most respected horse breeding operations in the entire western United States. As the new century approached, Carson and Galena spent more time reflecting on their lives and less time on the day-to-day operations of the ranch. They had earned the right to slow down, to enjoy their grandchildren, to appreciate the peaceful life they had fought so hard to build. On quiet evenings, they would sit on the porch of the home they had shared for so many years, watching the sun set over the mountains and counting their blessings. "You have any regrets?" Carson asked one evening as they watched their grandchildren play in the yard, their voices carrying on the warm summer breeze. Galena considered the question carefully. "I regret the circumstances that brought us together," she said finally. "I wish my people had not suffered so greatly. I wish I could have known my parents and my brother in this new life we built. But I do not regret a single choice I have made since the day you showed me kindness in that barn. Every path we chose, every challenge we faced, every moment of joy and sorrow, all of it led us here, to this family, this legacy. So no, I have no regrets about the life we built together." "Neither do I," Carson agreed, taking her hand and lifting it to his lips in a gesture he had repeated countless times over their decades together. "Meeting you was the best thing that ever happened to me, and I would do it all again without changing a single detail." They lived to see the turn of the century, celebrating the arrival of 1900 with their children, their grandchildren, and the ranch community that had become their extended family. Carson passed away peacefully in 1904 at the age of 53, his body simply worn out from a lifetime of hard work. Galena held his hand as he took his final breath, and in his last moments he whispered, "Thank you for the adventure, my love. Thank you for everything." Galena lived another 12 years after Carson's death, remaining active in the ranch operations and the lives of her growing family. She saw 8 grandchildren grow to adulthood, witnessed the continued success of Tall Pine Ranch, and knew the deep satisfaction of having built something that would outlast her. She spent her final years telling stories to her great-grandchildren, making sure they understood where they came from and what their mixed heritage represented, not a source of shame or confusion, but a bridge between worlds, just as she and Carson had hoped. When Galena passed away in 1916 at the age of 59, she was laid to rest beside Carson on the hillside overlooking the ranch they had built together. Her funeral was attended by hundreds of people, a testament to the respect and affection she had earned over the decades. Apache and white, ranchers and townspeople, family and friends, they all gathered to honor a woman who had survived the unsurvivable and had chosen to respond to cruelty with grace, to hatred with love, and to despair with hope. James Dalton stood at his mother's grave and spoke of her legacy, his voice carrying across the assembled mourners. "My mother taught us that our past does not have to define our future, that we can choose to build bridges instead of walls. She showed us that strength comes not from dominating others, but from surviving with dignity and helping others do the same. She and my father created something remarkable here, not just a successful ranch, but a family that honors both of their heritages, a community that values people for their character rather than their bloodlines. That is the legacy they leave us, and it is our responsibility to carry it forward." The Dalton family did indeed carry that legacy forward. Tall Pine Ranch remained in the family for generations, becoming increasingly successful and respected as the decades passed. The story of Carson and Galena became a cherished family history, told and retold to each new generation as an example of how love can overcome hatred, how kindness can change lives, and how two people from seemingly incompatible worlds can build something beautiful together. In the end, their love story was not just about a cowboy and an Apache captive. It was about the fundamental human capacity for compassion, about the courage required to see past prejudice and fear to the person underneath. It was about choosing, again and again, to be better than the worst impulses of your time and culture. And most of all, it was about building a future worthy of the sacrifices made to achieve it. From that moment in a Utah barn in 1876, when Carson Dalton offered water to a captive who expected only cruelty, to the thriving multi-generational family that carried their names and values into the 20th century and beyond, their story proved that the simple act of showing kindness to someone the world had deemed unworthy of consideration could change everything. It could heal wounds, bridge divides, create families, build legacies, and demonstrate that love, genuine and freely given, remains the most powerful force in the universe. Their descendants continue to tell the story, ensuring that Carson and Galena's names and their remarkable journey were never forgotten. And in that remembering, in the honoring of what they had overcome and what they had built together, their love lived on, inspiring generation after generation to choose kindness over cruelty, understanding over hatred, and hope over despair.